Hi, it's Stu, and this video is going to be my week in reading review, or my last epoch of reading. It was about a week, honestly. So the week before was my travel week, and the books I picked were parts of series. And for the better part, they were fun, frivolous, plot-driven books that didn't require, at least of me, a whole lot of emotional or intellectual energy, and but still really affirmed that there are different reasons to read and different ways to read. And they were great books for the kind of reading that I was going to be doing, which is starting and stopping, being able to pick up, like getting distracted because I was traveling, and not necessarily having set reading times. And then I kind of moved into this week of reading when there wasn't really a prompt. I just picked books as they kind of occurred to me and what had come off hold on my Libby shelf. And it was a completely different reading experience. It was dense. It was, there was a lot of depth and a lot of opportunity for me to explore my identity as someone who lives inside of the United States, as a woman, and really contemplate lives much different than mine, and history that's led us all to here. So without further ado, the first book that I read, which was How Much of These Hills is Gold. And this book is by C.Palm Zhang. And in fact, it was the winner of the 2020 Booker Prize. Now, when I saw that on this book, even though I had kind of already suspected I would take this book, it was at a thrift shop, I was a little hesitant because I've read a couple in this last reading era, or reading streak, I should call it. I've read a couple of Booker Prize winners and they just haven't been for me for whatever reason. But in any case, this cover was really compelling and the synopsis was compelling to me. I've talked about this a little in a couple of other videos. It is very much a landscape novel, I would say, with a lot of prose, and it explores how two siblings survive with grief in the end of the American gold rush, and it has a lot of testimony to the destruction of land and the cost the development was, but also it explores really at what human cost did the development of the Western United States come at. There's a lot of contemplation as well of what does it mean to belong, who gets to belong, who doesn't get to belong, and also what is family. So I found this book to be I wouldn't say captivating. It was a little hard for me to get into, but I would say really revealing. I think that this was confronting and revealing, and I'm glad that I read it. The second book I read was my only fully digital book in this last reading era, and that was Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, where this book covers two siblings, and it starts with the loss of their father. Sally Rooney's Intermezzo does as well. In the case of the Intermezzo, these two siblings have an age gap, and they are male. And I found it a little as well hard to get into the Sally Rooney book, but from the beginning, it was clear that Sally Rooney's craft is worth noting, that she is a very well-crafted, well-established writer, and even if this book and or any of her books aren't for me, I could at least bear witness in the first few chapters that this was an incredible writer. As I went in, I found the intimacy and the vulnerability of the stream of consciousness of these two men really compelling, and I liked the way that she didn't use punctuation for dialogue. So inner and outer dialogue kind of grammatically got mishmashed. And I also liked how she engaged in maybe two different, almost completely different writing styles for each of the younger brother and the older brother's point of view. The women in the book did not have an incredible amount of depth, but I think part of this book was the exploration of how men lean on women and necessarily don't even see their depth, like ask them to carry their grief. Men ask, it investigates how perhaps in a sort of genderized experience that the males ask women to carry grief for them, and the women do it, you know, without ever having been asked or honored as a part of the role that they play. Intermezzo, I think, is not for everyone, but I can see how it's really beloved by those who love it. And I would highly recommend it to a certain kind of reader. And at the end, was very glad that I read it. It was a big book, right? It's hard to see it digitally. And I think that's my trick. If it's a really big book, just read it digitally, because then I don't think about how big it is. But it was followed by another kind of biggish book, between 400 and 500 pages, both of these books. And that's Kristin Hannah's The Women. And where in Kristin Hannah's Women, I return to the exploration of women and women's roles. This covers particularly one character and her experience with a couple of other women who she becomes very close and lifelong friends to, their experience as nurses in Vietnam. Vietnam is a very well-covered topic in movies, especially, and in books, from the male's perspective. And so I found a lot of how Kristin Hannah weaved in the history as a historical novel, but not so much that you came out of the story for people who aren't really into reading all of the history. And I think that was even more obvious to me with all the familiarity from all of the movies and other literature or other media that have been littered throughout my life, which told the male story. I think that this book read very well. It was a page turner. So it was one of those, when people talk about pacing, this is a book that's well paced, and really keeps you in the story, while developing some characters and exposing to some important aspects of history. I really appreciated the friendship between the three females, and I thought that was an important exploration. I would have some criticisms of this book, but I don't think they're worth bringing up, because overall I can see how and why this book is such a popular read. I think it reaches a really wide audience, and I would recommend this book to anyone who's a reader and doesn't mind sort of larger books, and especially those who like historical fiction. Speaking of sort of exploring the relationships between women, I carried that over into my next read, which was The 5-Star Weekend. And when I got The 5-Star Weekend, I made a comment that this cover would not have compelled me. This does not say to me I'm the audience for this book, but I wanted to give it a chance. I know I've heard a little bit about at least the Hotel Nantucket, and and there's some reverence for Elin Hilderbrand's writing, so I thought I would give it a chance. In the whole reading of the book, I was made very aware, and I came in kind of knowing, I guess predetermined bias as well, that I'm not the audience for this book. I want to say that I want my feminism to be able to expand and include the stories of all kinds of women. I guess my issue would be that the way that these characters are developed is so familiar, if not tired. It's almost like the stereotype that's trying to become the archetype of how women are inside of almost all media, especially like movie and sitcom, for far too long. And so again, I can't say I was bored because, in fact, one thing I can say about Ellen Hildebrand is she kept me in her story all the way through the book. So I could give that praise, but I could say also, like, maybe sometimes annoyed, or maybe sometimes just like, really, where's the depth? Where's the depth of these characters? And I mean, they're petty and catty and, you know, anyway, I also did not appreciate the description of female bodies. I understand that as someone who lives inside of a female body, that feeling insecure about my body and how it's perceived for multiple reasons is very much part of the female experience. But the description of female bodies and the description that these females even how they describe their own bodies and their own insecurities, I don't think problematized that. I think it perpetuated that. And I just, I find it hard to be forgiving for that. In the end of the day, I thought when I picked this up, this was going to be a page turner, kind of palate cleanser, and it definitely kept me in the story. I don't regret having read it, but I think that my sort of, again, I'm not the audience, but my criticisms of this book sort of outweighed oh, this was a great book. So I can absolutely see why this book is popular, and I am very happy to put it back into a Little Free Library. In fact, I have one in my mind that seems to there seems to be a lot of people who are exchanging in it that read books, I would say, of this audience. So the last book I read, and it wasn't one planned, it just came off of hold on my Libby shelf, and I had it on a previous TBR and decided to just bump it because we had some kind of jury days, and this font was a little small for me to read in anything but natural light. And so it came off my Libby shelf, and I had said, I'm going to be patient with myself with this book. That's The Girl Who Sang to the Buffalo, because it's basically a memoir nonfiction. And it's just not my era right now, I keep saying, but I wanted to give it a try. And in fact, I couldn't put this book down. This was the one book that I just could not put down. It was the one book also that I contemplated when grabbing, like, I want to always stay in the conversation. So I'll sidebar for a second. It's important for me to listen to and stay in the conversation about who has the right to tell whose story, who has the right to not only tell someone's story other than their own, but also who has the right to profit from. And this whole endeavor of publishing and making money off of books does enter us into the realm of profiting, not just propagating the story, right? And are there ends that justify the means? I am in no way qualified to have strong opinions on said topic. And I want to be very clear even to myself. However, I want to always be ready and willing to listen, and always sit and think even about what would my opinions be given now that I have access to the story. I got it at a thrift store for 50 cents, so I'm not necessarily contributing to the profit, which has its own array of problematizations, right? On the back, there is a statement from Anton Truer, who is someone who I know at least a little bit about and whose opinions I trust. Who I trust to have somewhat of an authority on an opinion about who gets to tell a story such as this, which is in many ways sacred. I think in many ways sacred. And I will say that this book it's a memoir of this author, Kent Nerborn, who is following the story of a young girl whose name is Yellowbird. He's following the story of an older man who wants to find out what happened to his sister, Yellowbird, who was sent to a boarding school. And he's following the path of this story. And there is, and he's entering to a realm of which he's not familiar. And he's been taught, due to structural societies and constructs of supremacy, that it's like this world there are a lot of ways to minimize the importance of this realm, I think I would call it, because there is this, even a testament, there's a part of this book wherein Dan, the Lakota man, says to Kent, like, we don't live in two different worlds. We live in the same world. We have different understandings of this world. And I really liked that quote. It's really poignant. In any case, this book actually grapples with who's telling, not necessarily who's profiting from, but who's telling whose story and why it's important or why it isn't important. I think this was an amazingly written book. I think this is an amazing book. And I'm very happy to have read it. And in fact, when I was nearing the end, I was thinking about next week's TBR and thinking, I don't know if I was quite ready to just jump off of a book like this into fiction that didn't center the stories of the original peoples and caretakers of the United States, because the next book I'm reading, it features that. But let me see. I have someone I want to, I think my final comments will be, first, I have someone I want to give this book to in my mind, because they are a white identified person who lived on a reservation for a while. And this is a white identified person who spent a lot of time in this particular book with Ojibwe and Lakota people in what is now Minnesota and North Dakota. And also, I have one little gripe about this blurb on the back, which says A Journey to an Unknown America. And I think that would be the publishers of this book. And I know this is, now I'm borderline onto pedantic, but I didn't appreciate the choice of the word unknown. I mean, this America that's covered in this book is clearly likely known, I don't know if clearly is the right, it was likely known to the Ojibwe and the Lakota people about whom it's written, right? So I think choosing a word like unknown also sort of placates, if not plays into the erasure of those people. And I think a better adjective could have been chosen, or a better descriptor could have been chosen. In any case, in finishing this book, I decided to add to my next week's reading TBR prompt is 2-word titles. And I have a Louise Erdrich book, which I hauled recently at the St. Vincent de Paul in Portland. It's a 2-word title. It's called Four Souls. Louise Erdrich is Chippewa, I believe. And this book takes place on the Ojibwe Reservation in Minnesota. And I thought that would be a good sort of crosswalk. I don't know when I'm going to read it in next week's reading challenge, but I suspect I might read it before or after Oh Beautiful, which I've already made a video about being in the challenge. And Oh Beautiful takes place in North Dakota. So I think that having this telling of the Ojibwe experience, and then this telling of sort of contemporary times North Dakota oil boom through the child of an immigrant could be a good way to sort of keep putting the patchwork together of the quilt, which is, how do I understand this country that I live in, the systems of power and privilege that operate in it, and that I operate in as well, and then my place in it all, right? So Four Souls is being added to next week's reading. And this last week that I just finished up was just a really dense, amazing week of reading, and yet again I am so affirmed for being a reader.